Beloved ones, what you are about to encounter in these verses is far more than history or narrative. These passages are living, divine blueprints for healing wounded souls, restoring shattered identities, and cultivating unshakable intimacy with God. They are a pattern that has transformed hearts for over 4,000 years, guiding countless generations from brokenness into the fullness of God's love. These words are not merely to be read. They are to be encountered, pondered, and allowed to speak into the deepest chambers of your heart. They invite you into an experience of God that reshapes who you are and awakens you to His presence in every aspect of your life. Let us read together from Genesis 12:8-9. From there, he moved to the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There, he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev, the sacred geography of the soul. Abram's journey is a profound rhythm of movement and sacred pause. The Hebrew phrase Vaisa Misham literally means he pulled up his tent pegs from there. But embedded in this simple phrase is the verb nasa, rich with spiritual and emotional significance. Nasa means to lift, to carry, to bear, to forgive, and to remove completely. Each movement Abram makes embodies a divine principle. Forward motion with God lifts what oppresses you and removes what does not belong in your future. Often emotional, psychological, or spiritual paralysis feels safer than trusting God to advance you. Yet the Hebrew nasa promises liberation, restoration, and divine realignment. Each step we take in obedience carries the potential to release what has held us captive: trauma, shame, fear, and old patterns. The hill country he moves to is called Har Mikadem Lebeit El, east of Bethel. In the rich symbolism of Hebrew cosmology, east signifies Eden, original design, divine intention, and fresh beginnings. It is the direction of restoration, where God's creative blueprint for your life unfolds. Har Hill represents elevated ground where heavenly perspective, revelation, and transformation become accessible. When trauma distorts our perception, God calls us to ascend, to see ourselves from heaven's perspective, not from the lens of past wounds or limitation. Spiritual elevation transforms how we process pain, fear, and uncertainty, bringing clarity, hope, and divine insight. The placement between Bethel and Ai creates a liminal space, a threshold where the divine meets the human and where healing begins. Bethel, house of God, symbolizes divine presence, eternal purpose, and your true identity. It is the holy ground of encounter, where the soul aligns with God's will. Ai, heap of ruins, represents brokenness, failure, trauma, and past disappointment. Abram intentionally positions himself between these two realities. Healing does not come from escaping brokenness, nor from ignoring it. True restoration comes from meeting God within the tension, acknowledging the ruins while simultaneously embracing divine presence. As St. Augustine reflected, the soul encounters God most profoundly not by fleeing struggle, but by facing it with God at the center. Modern psychological insight confirms this. Integration of past wounds with spiritual engagement cultivates resilience, maturity, and wholeness. The pilgrim's tent, temporary dwelling, permanent trust. The Hebrew term for pitched his tent conveys intentional settlement, expectation, and trust. Pilgrimage is both external and internal. The tent, ohel, is temporary yet sacred, a portable sanctuary, a prefiguration of the tabernacle, and ultimately Christ himself, who pitched his tent among us. According to the Syriac Orthodox tradition, St. Ephraim the Syrian, Abram's tent represents a soul at home wherever God is present, able to carry divine presence into any circumstance. For those wounded by family, home, or past relational trauma, this teaches a profound truth. Your true dwelling is not defined by circumstances. It is defined by the presence of God within you. This is transformative. When you learn to carry God's presence, every space, every situation, challenge, or wilderness can become sacred ground for encounter, restoration, and growth. Building the altar, divine exchange, and inner transformation. In this sacred tension between Bethel and Ai, Abram builds a second altar, Mizbeach. Vibin Sham Mizbeach La Yahweh. Bana conveys not simple construction, but purposeful, permanent establishment with divine intention. Mizbeach, from the root zbak, indicating sacrifice, meeting, exchange, and transformation. The altar is where heaven and earth intersect, where brokenness meets God's wholeness. Anxiety transforms into peace. Shame becomes restoration. Fear is exchanged for faith. The Hesychast fathers and mystics of Mount Athos teach that altar building mirrors theosis, union with God, the ultimate transformation of the human soul. Modern neuroscience affirms that embodied spiritual acts, like building an altar, kneeling in prayer, or physical gestures of worship, reshape the brain and reinforce spiritual growth at neurological and emotional levels. For anyone carrying trauma, the altar provides a holy space to surrender control, to allow God's love to reconstruct the heart. Every act of worship, every declaration, every moment of surrender builds inner spiritual architecture, a permanent foundation for hope, healing, and divine intimacy. Calling on the name, proclamation of divine reality. After building the altar, Abram called upon the name of the Lord, Vayikra Beshem Yahweh, Kara, to proclaim with authority and intention, not timidly whisper or silently pray. Yahweh, I am who I am, eternal, self-existent, dynamically present, and actively transformative. Calling God's name is not a plea for presence. It is a declaration that He is already there, actively working, superseding every wound, fear, and limitation. The Coptic Orthodox tradition teaches that invoking God's name produces a mystical presence that transforms suffering into spiritual gold. The rabbinic tradition teaches that sincere calling makes that location akin to the Holy of Holies, a place sanctified by the encounter with the eternal God. This act anchors your I am in God's eternal I am. Your identity is no longer defined by circumstance, history, or trauma. This is spiritual neuroplasticity, rewiring your mind, heart, and soul to trust, hope, and walk in divine reality. Journey to the Negeb, purification and growth. The text continues, and Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. Halak Vanaso Negba emphasizes ongoing, deliberate motion, a lifestyle of determined faith and trust. Negeb, Nagav, dry, arid, yet a place of cleansing, spiritual preparation, and divine refinement. The Negeb represents the divine workshop, where God purges superficial dependencies to cultivate deeper reliance on Him. Just as Christ emptied Himself in kenosis, so too are we called to empty self-reliance and allow God to strengthen, teach, and guide us. Wilderness seasons are not punishment, they are preparation, not interruption. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition calls this spiritual nomadism, the courage to follow God beyond comfort and familiarity. The Armenian Apostolic tradition calls it purification through trial, a necessary stage of sanctification and spiritual maturity. Abram's model teaches that healing and spiritual growth require movement, surrender, worship, and trust, even in arid, challenging seasons. Christ-centered fulfillment. Abram's journey foreshadows Christ. Jesus is our ultimate altar, the perfect meeting place between heaven and earth. He embodies Bethel, carrying humanity's brokenness, AI, into God's presence. Through Christ, our temporary tents become holy dwellings, and our worship becomes generationally transformative, blessing not just ourselves but our families, communities, and beyond. Beloved, your personal Bethel and I exist in your daily life. Christ transforms the liminal spaces, turning ruins into sacred encounters where divine love, restoration, and purpose flourish. Sequential spiritual pattern for healing and transformation. This passage provides a 4-step blueprint for deep, sustainable spiritual growth. Pitch the tent. Establish presence and stability in God's love. Build the altar. Surrender brokenness. Cultivate sacred inner space and engage in divine exchange. Call upon Yahweh. Proclaim God's eternal reality over your life, activating spiritual neuroplasticity. Move forward. Advance toward God's purposes, trusting in His ongoing transformative work. Every altar, every tent, every proclamation builds spiritual inheritance, rewires the soul for hope, and positions you as a covenant partner of God. Reflective questions for the soul. Where is your Bethel, your sacred space for divine encounter? Which eye areas need God's healing touch? How can you embrace God's refining grace in your Negeb seasons? Are you willing to live as a pilgrim, trusting God in every tent, altar, and step of the journey? Healing affirmations. I dwell in God's presence, even amid uncertainty. My broken places become arenas of divine restoration. Wilderness seasons refine my faith and draw me closer to the Father. I move forward, leaving behind burdens and embracing God's purposes. My life is a pilgrimage, and every tent and altar leads to deeper intimacy with Christ. Conclusion. Beloved, your life is a sacred pilgrimage. Every step, every altar, every declaration is part of God's transformative blueprint. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a covenant partner with the Almighty, invited into intimacy, restoration, and purpose beyond imagination. May you have Abram's courage to move when God calls, wisdom to build altars wherever you are, and faith to call upon God's name with confidence that He meets you at every step of your journey.